But today is a big topic and it comes to training during HA recovery and also training outside of HA recovery. So I've put together a little bit of a list for us to cover. Now, when you are in HA recovery, obviously there's some changes that need to be made to training because the energy balance is either off or the stress response is too intense. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't ever return to intense exercise or a particular training capacity. It just means that whatever you're doing right now isn't a suitable balance for your body to be responding well or performing well. So, regardless of what your training style is or how often you're training, things that you need to consider while you're in HA recovery and continuing exercise. The key things are heart rate, intensity, frequency, rest, and fuel. So I'm going to break down those individually. And because we don't have anyone actively joining in on the call today, if any questions do pop up while you're listening to the replay, please do just let me know. And I'll get back to you either in another video or I'll comment straight away. All right, so we can work on that today. So first things first, there is some guidelines on the heart rate front. It is suggested that keeping a heart rate below 130 beats per minute can be quite helpful. And that's just because we're minimizing the stress response and the cortisol response. It's been quite noisy. What we want to be looking at is that when we are training is that we're not trying to smash ourselves and instead we're training with intention. So if you are trying to build muscle mass, you're looking at a time under tension perspective and you're looking for controlled reps, mobility. You can still increase in your strength and performance, but we're not trying to bust out as many reps as possible, which you might see in sort of your F45, Orange Theory, those types of group sessions or group classes, which probably brings us to another point. If you're doing group classes, I'll circle back to that. So I want to be keeping the heart rate at a moderate pace. When we're talking about intensity, we want to be mindful of how much we're pushing because obviously our body is quite stressed out at the moment, so we want to be minimizing that. It can be adapted in a few different ways. We could be looking at the actual volume of training that you're doing. So if you're doing, let's say, 5 sets of every exercise, it could be dropping to 3 or 4. If you are training to failure certain days, then it could be keeping a few reps in reserves, knowing that when your body is functioning better, then it's a good time for you to go to failure. With that in mind, depending on how you're programming your training, now a lot of you train with me, so you won't need to worry about this side of things. But if you're training on your own accord or with another trainer, it's very important that you periodize your training because if you're not having a fluctuation between your high intensity weeks and your lower intensity weeks, you're actually shortcutting off the gains that you can have from your training. All right, because your body needs to have the ebb and flow of a peak performance, let's say, versus time to relax and rebuild. Yeah, so it's very, very important that we're having those fluctuations in our training. And if you think about an elite athlete, they are never training for competition 12 months of the year. And what I mean by that is they have their competition season, which is where they'll build up to their peak performance leading into competition. And then after competition happens, they have a huge deload. They're focusing on back to their fundamentals, and then they rebuild again for comp season. So even if you're not a competitive athlete, we still need to take upon those principles when we're training by ourselves, because we need to have a time to challenge and we need to have a time to almost shut down and reboot. If you look at any kind of training modality, whether it be athletics, swimming, sprinting, bodybuilding, other sports aren't jumping to my mind, they will all have that in common. All of them will have a time where it's for peak performance and other times where it's a build. When we are also looking at frequency, we can be dropping down the number of days that you're training while keeping the volume the same. So that's another lever we can pull in regards to your training. Now, rest is obviously essential because that's what our body needs in order to balance and restore. But if you're in a position where rest is quite challenging, then we want to be making the most of the rest when you give yourself permission to have it. So sometimes we can get creative with the times that we're training so that we actually have a better or longer duration of rest, even though the training days might remain the same. So what that could look like is if you train in the morning, one morning, and then you don't train again until the following evening, you've had more than 24 hours worth of rest, even though you've trained one day after the other. Now, it's quite a small thing, but it really helps, because if you think about your capacity to rest and perhaps the inability to take a day off multiple days in a row, then that is a really good lever for you to pull, because you're creating a greater space between training sessions without feeling like you've taken a day off. All right. So again, if you look at your training first thing in the morning, and then the following day you don't train in the morning, you train that night, you've added in up to another 8 to 12 hours, depending on what time you train. If you would then take a rest day after that night session, right? So we're going to go another 24 hours and then not train until the morning, you're adding in another block that doesn't feel that way. So we can get quite creative with the rest days and the frequency, so that we're maximizing the rest without it feeling like you're pushing yourself all the time and you're being lazy and all those nasty things that kick in when you're taking a rest day. Fuel is absolutely essential, but I know you know that. All right, so we want to be making sure that we're hitting 30 grams of protein before training, 15 grams of carbohydrates at the minimum. Some of you won't like to train with a full belly, and that's completely fine. Others love to train with a full belly. So me personally, I like to have a full belly before I train, and different foods will feel different for me. So as an example, I've recently changed my breakfast to 60 grams of oats, some WPI protein powder and cacao powder. And I find that I'm full enough that I feel really energized for my training sessions, but not too full where I feel really heavy and like I actually can't move around because there's too much in my stomach. Other times I was having eggs on toast with avocado, which again are an absolute favorite. I love it. But I found that I didn't feel as good leading into a training session. So why I'm sharing this with you is because fuel is, one, incredibly important for how well you do train. And two, it's going to take some experimenting for you to find out what is the best fuel for you to have before training, right? And sometimes that feeds into ED territory because you've been eating a particular thing before you train for the last few weeks, months, years, and so on, that the idea of having anything different feels quite freaky. But if you can invite in some curiosity and wonder how your training could feel if you mixed up your fuel sources or if you changed up your macronutrients, it could be a little bit more exciting, because if you start to feel stronger in your sessions simply because of a fuel change, then it encourages you to actually keep fueling, because you can see the direct correlation it's giving you. You can see the cause and effect, right? That leads me into another area of fuel, and this comes up a lot, which is women will say, hey Jade, I can cut back my training. I don't like the idea of it. It feels really crappy, but I can do it. The only thing that happens if I cut down my training is that all of this baggage comes in that I feel like I can't eat or I don't deserve to eat because I'm lazy and I'm not doing anything, right? If you're falling into this category, this is a big mindset piece. And again, it's a really common one, but it's really good to identify and be aware of, because there is ways that we can work around it. So as an example, a starting point could be you're training 5 days a week and you decide to drop down to 4 days a week. All right, that feels like a really good change for you. But on the day that you're now not training, you feel like it's quite difficult to eat. You would be wanting to set a boundary between what you eat on training days and your absolute minimum, and finding somewhere in the middle where you're still feeling a little bit more than what you normally would, but perhaps it's not as much as you would on a training day, right? The other side of the fence is if you feel like that fifth day that you're going to take out is essential to you actually hitting your fuel targets, and perhaps you've only just changed your fuel targets, it could be more helpful for you to actually hold steady on the training and just practice having the calorie consumption that feels challenging. Because if we try and change too many things at once, we either feel like we can't do it or it's too overwhelming, right? So it's really important for you to do an audit on what's most important for you right now. And if you training 5 days instead of 4 actually allows you to hit, let's pretend it's 2,000 calories a day, then that fifth session is more than just a training session, because it's allowing you to practice the fuel that you really need to consume, right? Once that 2,000 becomes familiar, you've proven it's okay, you can do it, you know how to do it, you don't feel sick, your stomach feels good, you feel good, then you might decide, I might drop down to 4 sessions. Or I might keep my 5th session, but I'm going to make it a skill focus session. I'm going to work on handstands. I'm going to work on press handstands. I'm going to work on muscle ups or pistol squats or any kind of cool gymnastic-y calisthenics kind of movement. So you're still getting movement in, but it's a different type of challenge. Yeah. When you start to bring skills into your training programs, it can be quite helpful, because when it comes to the heart rate factor, we often reduce the heart rate compared to max lifts when we're doing back squats, deadlifts, things like that. If you're open to that style of training, definitely inviting curiosity there, because there is a fair bit of wiggle room where you're not in the territory of really pushing yourself, but you're still feeling like you're challenging yourself and you're making progress. Because if there is one thing that's consistent amongst women who are in HA recovery, is they like to feel like they're being challenged. They like to feel like they're succeeding at something, and they like to feel as though, I don't know, there's like a spring in their step about the way that they train. There's something different about them versus other people. And there's nothing wrong with that if we're using it to our success and not our detriment, right? So an example of that being used to our detriment is you absolutely training to the bone because you like to be the person who trains more than everybody else, right? It's not helpful to your health. And there's so many things that you can build your confidence from, rather than being the person who trains the most. And as a result, is sacrificing their health. All right. So we've covered a few key topics. I want to circle back. So the heart rate, 130 beats per hour. Oh, sorry, per minute. That is a guideline. Okay. It doesn't mean it's a make or break. It's just a guideline that's been put out there from time to time. Intensity, we want to be having fluctuations in our intensity. So there's weeks where it's a higher intensity, weeks where it's a lower. So on the bodybuilding front, we'd be looking at deload weeks, and we would be looking at times where we're challenging a heavier weight. For the most part, it's not the best time for you to be doing personal bests in 1 rep maxes, 2 rep maxes, because that is very taxing on the body. And if you're not fueling appropriately, it can be working against you. If you are fueling appropriately, it can still work in your favor. That's where fuel is very important, because when we're looking at energy balance, that's really what we need to be achieving. So if you can actually fuel the way you should be fueling, your training will look a lot different to someone who's struggling to fuel, because we're looking at how we can achieve the energy balance. And if we've got the different levers that we can pull on in order to get success, then the levers we pull determines how heavy we can train, how frequently we can train, and what our fueling looks like. We've spoken about frequency. We've spoken about rest, how we can get creative with the morning and night sessions and the rest day in between. And we've also spoken about fuel. Now, why a lot of women end up pulling back from training during HA recovery is often it's easier to deload the training, reduce the training, than what it is to eat more. Because when we're talking about HA recovery, we really are looking at finding a energy balance, right? So if you think about the amount of training that you're doing and amount of the energy that consumes, it might be quite challenging for you in order to eat whatever you need to train that much. Now, one thing that is earth-shattering, I guess you could say, is how much fuel is actually required when you're training 5 days a week, let alone 2 times a day, 5 days a week, right? And I completely understand that in the moment, it is unfathomable how much food we need to consume to support the level of training that we're doing. But if you can grant yourself permission to fuel the way you need to in order to support your training, it will completely change your reality. You'll train so much better. Your mental clarity will be better. Your energy will be better. Your personality will be better, right? Everything is going to feel so much better. But where the struggle lies is the only way you're going to believe that is if you give yourself the opportunity to try. Because otherwise, you have got months, if not years of baggage telling you that that's a lie, it's a trick, it's not going to happen for you. But if you can lean into the science, you can lean into the evidence, and you can give it a go, you will see that the fuel that you need in order to support your training, coupled with the training, equals incredible results. Now, in HA recovery, women will see body composition changes, often more body fat. And a lot of the time, it is because the energy balance changes over, because women reduce their training and increase their food, which is a very good pathway forward. Yeah. If you're looking to get your period back as quickly as you can, and you feel like you can easily increase calories, or that's an easier lever for you to pull, then that is one to maximize on. If you drop the training down, that's why women tend to get their period back a lot faster when they remove the training, because they don't need to eat as much in order to meet energy balance because they're not training anymore. If you're inviting the curiosity to fuel to complement your training, then you're looking at getting a period back while still training, which is actually the goal for many, many women, especially the women who tend to approach me for their HA recovery, is that they love exercise. It's a big part of their life and they always want it to be there. Um, when we're looking at making changes gradually, sorry, I've got a little list here, I'm just riffing off it, is we want to be looking at the different things that we can tweak in order to support our HA recovery. So that's the number of training days, it's the number of rest days, it's the intensity, it's having a skill focused day rather than just heavy lifting days. If you're doing a whole lot of cardio, you could be reducing the distance, you could be reducing the pace, you could be doing a walk run. There's actually so many different ways that we can play around with your training. And with that in mind, if you are training at the moment and you're not seeking me for help on the personal training side of things, please feel free to comment below what your training is, and I'd be more than happy to do an audit on it and ways that you could improve it to help facilitate your HA recovery. Or if you are cycling at the moment, which I know some of you are, is that how we can better ensure that your cycles remain between 28 to 35 days versus perhaps still sitting in the 40 to 50 day cycle realm. That's one thing you will start to see on the cycle syncing approach, is that we can actually manipulate how long your cycle length is by training a particular way to suit the hormonal fluctuations of your cycle. I'm so tongue-tied this morning, right? So with the, I'm going to circle back to the cycle syncing a little bit later, because we were just talking about making changes. Now, it's incredibly common for women to almost get like shiny object syndrome, because we're on the Facebook groups, we're listening to the podcast, we're reading all the different books, and we see how different women recover with different protocols. So rather than pick our own lane with our training, we start to go, but she did this and she did this and she did this and she did this. And then we don't know what to do with ourselves. What I would encourage you to do is review your style of training right now and what you're doing week in, week out. So write it down: how many days, how many reps, how many sets, how much cardio, what your heart rate's like, the duration, the frequency, all those things that we've just covered. And then based on that information, what is one thing you can do to reduce the stress response? Is it taking one set out? Is it reducing some reps? Is it reducing the minutes that you're jogging or running or on the spin bike? Is it swapping one set for 5 minutes of stretching to achieve splits? Yeah. Is it swapping out some shoulder press to do some handstands? Okay. So there's many different ways that you can make changes that still makes you feel like you're in control of your body and in control of your success, and that you're still progressing forward when it comes to physical movement. When we look at other women's decisions to train and how they train and how they get their body period back, it's difficult to conclude how and why, because outside of the fueling side of things, there is also a genetic factor that is important to consider. So when we're looking at a genetic factor, take HA out of the equation when it comes to women's capacity to have their menstrual cycle while training. On a bodybuilding side of the fence, there is women who will jump on stage to compete and have lost their periods 6 weeks earlier, right? Because they're incredibly lean, they're training a lot, and the body just goes, nope, not doing this. You've got other women who will get their period on comp day, right? And that's not being on any contraceptive pills or anything like that, right? So there is a genetic factor that plays a role in women's capacity, or I guess what they can tolerate on a stress response front. So when you are observing what other women are doing when it comes to their training, it's okay to observe it. It's okay to use it as motivation, but please do not use it as your guiding knowledge or your North Star as to what you should do for your training. Because what really defines what you should be doing with your training is your energy before and after sessions, your fuel or your capacity to fuel, and your body symptoms. Are you getting cervical mucus? Are you getting breast tenderness? Are you getting little blemishes or little cramps or symptoms of your period coming? If you're not, training/nutrition needs some more tweaking. All right, then we hold steady, see if symptoms pop up. Another example is I actually had a friend I went to high school with, and unfortunately she went through a really awful time with an eating disorder and exercise compulsion. She lost a lot of weight. She was quite petite by the end of it, and she was running 10 kilometers a day, and she was consuming very little calories. She continued to ovulate, and she continued to have her period month in, month out, and she was battling for a good 18 months with overtraining and weight loss and an unhealthy relationship with diet and exercise, and she never once lost her cycle. Right, where plenty of women would be polar opposite. They would have lost it after maybe 2 months of doing that. So bringing it back to when you're observing what other women are doing with their training, it's okay to use it as a source of motivation, but please do not use it as I should copy them because they got theirs back doing that, so I will too. What is your guiding or North Star is how your body is responding. Okay, so I'm going to send out the tracking sheet that I use for my cycle syncing ladies for online PT, because perhaps some of you who aren't doing it might like to start observing your symptoms when it comes to your training. So you can take a look at that, and I'll send it over later on today. Things that you consider with your training as well is how quickly you're recovering. So if you're pulling up sore, is it lasting 1 to 2 days, or is it lasting 3, 4, 5 days? Because if it's lasting too long, that is another sign that you're not feeling appropriately for the training sessions, your body isn't coping, or that you are training too hard for this stage of life. Again, HA recovery is not forever. It is a stage of life. Some of you would have heard this analogy before, others not, but that is that HA recovery isn't that different from having a broken bone. So if you think that you're an Olympic sprinter, right, and you've tripped over, you've broken a bone, and you are absolutely devastated, rightfully so, first point of call is you get plaster on the leg, you give it time to heal, and then you go through rehab. After you've gone through your rehab, you then progress back into full capacity training. All right, given everything's thumbs up, we're going super cookie cutter, you broke the leg and you've had a perfect recovery, right? HA is much the same. So at the moment, the broken bone is the missing period. The plaster is your HA recovery protocol. It is whatever your body needs in order to heal and restore. As soon as that's occurred, the plaster comes off. So that would be your first period's occurred. And then we go through the rehab phase. We start to rebuild your training. We start to rebuild and reform and recomposition. Yeah. So when we're looking at HA, we tend to have this doomsday scenario of this is going to haunt me for the rest of my life and I can never go back to doing what I love and rah, rah, rah. And in the moment, it feels so intense. And I get it because I was there, and I remember many, many days of bawling my eyes out thinking it was unfair. And you know what, to a degree, it was unfair. You know, we take pride in our bodies, and we so innocently strive for these health goals and then end up with HA, and it does feel like a bit of a kick to the stomach sometimes. But as someone who has seen the process through and is now, gosh, 5 years past it, you can be better than ever before. All right. It just takes time. That could be frustrating to some of you. It could be inspiring to some of you. But once you get out of this HA recovery phase, you start to rebuild and be better than ever before. Your body's going to perform better because you're actually cycling. Your relationship with exercise is better, so you're going to enjoy it even more. Your relationship with food is better, so you're going to enjoy that even more. HA recovery is walking through the mud, right? But once you get out of it, it is smooth sailing. Whew, I've been talking a lot. What else is there? The speed of recovery is obviously different for everybody. And depending on the levers you pull, it could be faster or it could be longer. So that's going back to training and fueling again, and how easy it is for you to meet energy balance. I'm going to jump into some cycle syncing information, and then I'm going to jump to 2 questions that were submitted from 2 of the ladies in the group who are unable to join the call. But for now, let's go into the cycle syncing approach. So once you get your period back and we're ready to start rebuilding, there's a few markers that we're going to be looking at in order to make sure that we're building up your capacity without stressing the body out too much. Obviously, we're assuming you're fueling properly. Okay, so I'm not going to tap into fuel anymore. You've probably heard enough about fuel. We're assuming that you're eating enough to support your training and having a menstrual cycle. Push that aside. Within your cycle, there is times where your body is much more inflamed, which is the 2 weeks before you bleed. And your body literally increases your inflammation markers because it needs to grow the lining that will soon shed. So the only way that grows is if the body inflames, which is really incredible, right? Like our body can grow this lining out of nowhere and then shed it and let it go. Most of the time, women will report symptoms of feeling lower in energy, lower in motivation, or they tend to experience a lot more niggles in their muscles and in their joints. Based on that information, we know that it's a good time to reduce your training capacity in those 2 weeks. That could mean it's a good time for your deload. It could mean you train 4 days in those 2 weeks rather than 5. It could mean that you don't do cardio for those 2 weeks or you slow down the pace. It could mean that you do the same amount of movements, but you intentionally drop the weight. All right, so that falls into the deload category. That's because we know the body's inflamed. It's not as good as navigating stress. So at that point, we don't want to stress it out because it's giving us signals that it's busy doing other things, which is completely fine. Now, some of you might jump into, but what if I want to perform really well? If you are a competitive athlete and you have a competition on, and it's that second part of your cycle, you can absolutely perform to your best because the psychological supersedes the physiological. If you tell yourself, I can't compete because I feel like crap, your wish is my command, right? Your brain will just follow that lead. If you tell yourself, I'm prepped, I'm ready, I'm in the best condition I've ever been, absolutely, your wish is my command. Competition is different to training. The reason why we don't push during this part of our cycle when we are training is because we're not competing. So there is no need to push ourselves during that stage of our cycle when there's no performance focus. Yeah. So if you're looking at long-term outcomes, working with your body allows you to achieve a physique and a state of performance that is easy for you to attain versus perhaps always feeling like you're forcing it or feeling like it could easily run away from you at any given moment unless you keep challenging it. When you honor your body's signals and you program your training to complement your inflammation, your energy, your motivation, it means that when everything kicks up again, which tends to happen when our bleed begins, we can push really hard, we can train really hard, and we can make the most of the resources our body has. So those first days of our cycle when the bleed has occurred, our inflammation markers just run away. They drop right down, our hormones drop right down. And at that point in time, we're the closest to male physiology that we can be. Not that we want to be men, but on the testosterone, estrogen, progesterone side of things, that's why women tend to be able to lift heavier weights, run faster, even mentally navigate stress better that first week of their period, because physiologically we're primed for it. It's a really, really good time to take things on. Where this varies, if you are a woman who experiences heavy bleeding, headaches, or other PMS symptoms the first few days of your period, your body will signal to you, I'm not lifting anything heavy and I'm not running fast. If that is you, your programming would look different. It would mean that the first 3 days of your cycle, perhaps still continuing a part of that deload, or you program things like yoga or mobility, because it's just not a good time for you to be lifting heavy weights or running really fast. But because you've collected all this data over the last few weeks, months, you know that day 4, you start to feel incredible. So that is when we increase the training intensity and we start to work on peak performance. Yeah. You would have heard of different cycle syncing things on social media, magazines, news reports, where it's like you're on your period, so you do yoga and rest and restore and, I don't know, go hide in a little cave and knit a sweater. But this is helpful for some if they feel that way. If you feel like your period kicks in and you just want to withdraw from the world and and do that, then absolutely fine. But if you get your period and you actually feel incredible, like you're ready to take on the world, that's exactly what you do. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Your body does not lie to you. Right? Your body has all the secrets. It has all the messaging that it needs. So if your period starts and you're feeling really lethargic and yuck, then based on the data, you'll go, okay, I still need to take it easy these first few days. If you're feeling incredible, we know it's a good time to push. Same thing happens around about ovulation. The general ovulation time in the media, they'll be like, ovulation's the time to go out and socialize and do all the heavy intensity stuff. For the most part, that is true. Ovulation is like your last key point to really push your training for the week before we start to deload. It is a time where women tend to feel more social. Yes, 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 yes. Some women, though, around ovulation, they get ovulation pains. They actually have a really big dip in energy. They have a very big dip in mood. And it's actually not a good time for them to push heavy on the training. So that's where, again, cycle syncing comes in handy, because rather than trusting what everybody else tells you should be thinking, feeling, and behaving, you have data to go, you know what, I just feel crappy every time around about this day. So based on that, I'm going to train to suit how I think, feel, behave. Yeah. It helps on two fronts. One, physiologically, it's going to lead to better results long term because you're maximizing on your energy and your recovery when you've got it, and you're reducing when your capacity is not as good. Second of all, which is where cycle syncing I find is incredibly helpful for women who have had HA in the past, is it creates some space for us to not be perfect. It creates some space for us to not need to absolutely smash ourselves because we've created this reality where the only reason a gym session counts is because we've smashed it, or because we can barely breathe, or because our muscles are about to explode. Cycle syncing gives us our power back so that we can actually pay attention to the cues our body's giving us and take pride in honoring them. As an example, there's two wonderful women that I work with, and they experience quite a severe drop in training motivation and energy the 2 weeks leading up to their period. Now, the first time they experienced this, it was quite daunting. They felt like a loss of identity happening again. I just got my training mojo back, and now I don't want to go. I don't want to train. I've got all these incredible goals. I want to have a body recomposition, and I'm sitting here dreading going to the gym because I can't do it. I just don't have the need to do it. The desire, sorry. My mind wants to be there, but my body doesn't. And there's a real conflict because you've gone through HA recovery. Listen to your body. You know, if it doesn't want to move, let it rest. And now you're here with your training goals going, but if I've got training goals, I need to train. So what do I do? Do I take the rest? Do I not train? Once this pattern is kicked in, or you're aware of it, you can take ownership of it. So the first 1 or 2 times you feel like a broken woman who's lost their identity once again. The third time you're smarter and you're wiser. I know this is how I feel leading up to my period. 1, great side, my period is coming because I'm seeing XYZ symptoms. My body's telling me it's coming. 2, rather than hate myself for feeling this way, I'm just going to accept that this is how I feel at this stage of my cycle. I can't train the way I did last week, and that's okay because it's not that time to be pushing it. So, what is the best form of movement I can do based on how I'm thinking, feeling, behaving, knowing that it still honors my long-term goals? For some, it's keeping the same movements, reducing the volume. For some, it's completely swapping out the gym for Pilates or yoga or walking. There is no right or wrong answer, but where cycle syncing is quite helpful is mentally it spares that part of you that wants to criticize and judge and I guess hate yourself for thinking, feeling, behaving a particular way. Because rather than going, why I did this last week and now I just can't do it this week, you can own it and go, you know, I know I feel this way for a few days. It sucks. I don't like it. It's crappy. But here's my plan so that I can be consistent, but not be feeling awful. Because we always want to be enjoying our movement. Cycle syncing encompasses the periodization side of things to complement your hormonal profile. It also allows us to better pick rest days and complement, your PMS symptoms. So again, I'll send out that cycle tracker for you all to have a look at. If you are cycling, it can be very helpful. If you're not cycling, but perhaps you feel like things are starting to kick in, it can still be really helpful because it tracks your mood, your energy, cervical mucus, breast tenderness, and a few other things, including sleep. And you might actually start to see there's waves of hormonal fluctuations, which is really helpful because if you are still training, you can begin to complement those waves, right? So that when your period does come, you've already got a fair bit of data to be working on. One other variable that affects some women is that they notice their amount of sleep dramatically affects their performance. So if they've had less than 6 hours sleep, their training is just rubbish, or regardless of the stage of cycle, right? Start or end, it doesn't matter. And then other women, if they have too much sleep, they feel the same way. So that tracking sheet comes in handy as well, because if you have underslept or overslept and you have a really crappy session when you're expecting a really, really good session, you can go back and go, you know what? Data tells me that if I undersleep, oversleep, my body tends to react this way. So you don't need to sit there hating on yourself. You can just go, I know my body so well, and this is why this is happening. Okay. I feel like I've covered a lot on the training side of things. If you have any more questions, please let me know, either comment or send me a DM, and I'll send a follow-up video on the group page, or obviously I'll comment back. There was 2 questions submitted outside of the call to be addressed today. So I'll dive into those now. One of them, sorry, I've got like a croaky voice if you haven't noticed. One of them is, can I recomp at home? Can I experience a body recomposition at home? Yes, you can. Essentially, if you are meeting the principles of progressive overload and periodization, and your fueling is suitable for a body recomposition, it will happen. Where people, men and women, draw the short straw with training at home is because their access to different weights and equipment is capped because they're at home. Often progressive overload principles take a back step, and just the consistency of moving is the primary focus. If you're only using a 3 or 5, a 7 kilo weight, and perhaps you don't have the space or the budget to have more weights available to you, progressive overload can take different forms. So we could be looking at a longer time under tension. We could look at increasing the numbers of repetitions or the number of sets versus simply increasing the weight, right? Because increasing the weight is probably the easiest and most go-to form of progressive overload, but it's not the only one. So if you're training at home and you want to experience a body recomposition, either way, building up your muscle mass and increasing your strength is absolutely essential. And having a structured training program is just as important at home as what it is at the gym, because you're more likely to stay the same with your level of effort at home because of the equipment available to you versus if you went to a gym where you've got all the weights and all the different equipment. A body recomp obviously would involve fueling appropriately. Sorry to mention fuel again, but it really does matter. So some of you have had an experience with Claudia so far. If you haven't already and you're interested, it's a wonderful service. Essentially, you submit a food and lifestyle diary, she'll do a review, and then you can make some changes and see how you feel after those changes, and perhaps check in with her again. Even personally, I've gone through multiple body recompositions. I actually was going to share a few different photos of the different stages I've gone through, but I never know how it's going to sit. So if you feel like seeing the different stages of Jade's body, let me know and I'll share it with you. But essentially, I've gone from, incredibly low body fat to a body fat percentage I didn't enjoy, to being pregnant, to being postpartum, to dropping body fat, to being pregnant, to being postpartum. And now I found myself in a position where I'm actually training less than I ever have before, outside of my little 4-week all in of walking and yoga. I'm eating a lot more carbohydrates and food than I have before, and my body has surprised me with a wonderful body recomposition. And the only reason I want to share that with you is because early in the call, I said to you, you need to experiment and try so that you can collect the evidence that supports this is a good choice. Because once you see the evidence, it's so much easier to go, oh, of course, I should have been doing this all along. Even as someone who's been in this realm for God knows how many years, the idea of fueling more still was a bit touchy. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it, but I didn't have a choice, so I did. And, you know, at this stage of my life, when I've been through so many different body shapes and sizes, it's just that now. It's just if my body was to gain a whole lot of weight, it will, right? Because our body's always going to change. So I guess my little superpower alongside this journey is now that I can find joy in all different shapes and sizes of my body. But that is probably another topic for another day. If you're interested in that, please let me know. But as a result of increasing fuel, increasing carbohydrates, keeping the protein high, I was actually having too much protein. My weight has stayed the exact same, but my body composition is completely different. So linking back to that question, you can body recomp anywhere. Progressive overload is key. If you want to submit your training, I would be more than happy to do a review and put some suggestions forward for you. The second question is, why can't I just flick the switch? Why can't I just make change and behave differently? Well, because depending on how long you've been practicing your different thoughts and behaviors, there is a very strong, loud, noisy, angry, grumpy voice in your head that doesn't want you to make any change, because if you make that change, that voice is going to go away and it's threatening. So you might have heard the comment, the eating disorder screams loudest when it's about to die. And that couldn't be more true. Some of you listening might have even experienced this yourself, where when you're making really big leaps and bounds with your nutrition and your relationship with exercise, the eating disorder voice is angry and it screams so loud. And it can be intimidating, it can be scary. But the more you lean in, the more you start to realize that you are stronger than the voice. And it is very much just that. It is just a voice. And that we have got more power over the voice than what we ever realize. But the key to realizing we have such power is by choosing a path and practicing it and rehearsing it as much as possible. So if the behavior change was to be eating a little bit more, a lot more, whichever, it's going all out on it and doing as often as possible until you build up the confidence that you can continually do it and everything is okay. The voice can't scream any louder than what it already is, and that you're safe. All right, you're not going to wake up an elephant as you feel like you will. Your clothes aren't going to randomly not fit you within a 24-hour period. If you're severely underfueling, all the extra fuel is going to do is help your brain function, help your mood stay lighter, and give you more energy, and also allow you to focus a lot better, allow you to train better. But essentially, flicking the switch, it really is up to us to flick, right? And it always feels like it's outside of ourselves, because that eating disorder voice feels like an intruder in our mind. But the reality is, it's not the intruder, it's just the co-inhibitor, which makes me think of a lady I worked with a long time ago, Carla. And we had a conversation about the eating disorder voice, and she called it monkey brain, right? It's like having a monkey running rampant in your mind. And the secret is learning that the monkey's there, but often or always that there's also a cage. And all you need to do is lock the monkey in the cage and move on with your life, knowing that the monkey can escape. All right. And that doesn't mean we've failed. It doesn't mean we've ruined anything. It just means that sometimes the monkey gets out and we've got awareness of it and we are not tolerating it. So we put the monkey back in the cage and lock it up. If you are feeling stuck, if you're feeling like you can't flick the switch, this is often triggered by perhaps having a day where the eating disorder voice is louder than normal. And it's a day where the eating disorder wants you to behave a particular way. All right. The more days we have where the eating disorder screams loud, as much as they're uncomfortable, it's also a good sign we're making progress if we can keep our behaviors the same, that we can continue to stay on top of what our priorities are and fuel the way that we know we need to. Every day we have a bad day, I guess you could say, where we're just hearing the ED voice scream as loud as ever before. The more days we pursue of those, the more we gain the confidence that we are actually bigger and stronger than our eating disorder. So if you are listening to this and you are wanting to flick a switch, it's important for you to pick the path of least resistance, pick a change, and then think about how often you can implement it every single day and almost challenge yourself to doing it for a 30-day streak. All right? Because the moment you prove to yourself you can do it, the eating disorder voice will begin to minimize, you will begin to trust, and you'll also start to see that you've got so much more power than you've ever realized. And that really is the secret of this whole journey, is that it doesn't matter about that little devil voice in our shoulder. We've got this incredible angel voice that knows what's best for us. And it's about trusting that and leading into that. Now, I feel like I've been talking for a very long time. You also probably feel the same. I'm going to love and leave you all. I hope you have enjoyed this call. Any questions, please do comment below. I would love to explore this topic more with you, but I hope it's giving you a lot to think about and fuel for thought, I guess is probably the best way to put it. But for now, I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I will see you in the next call.